So we're starting to see, resiliency standards, resiliency certifications that provide a stamp of approval. So you, the home buyer, now knows, okay, I feel confident in this construction. The bank that's financing you also knows, okay, this is a green building. It doesn't only target emissions reductions, but it also targets resiliency. So I feel confident in this building.
Our esteemed panelists will share insights on various aspects, including the impact on climate events on the property market, the cost and the ROI of climate-smart construction, perspectives on new construction projects, financial services supporting developers, and as well as SME opportunities in the climate-adapted property market.
It's a real pleasure to share with you this morning, because many of you, this subject matter has been a passion of mine for pretty much all of my professional life. I founded and chair an organization called Environmental Solutions, and that company was formed to bring, as we said at the time, solutions to the marketplace. I started my career as an academic, lecturing at UWI for many, many years, and realizing that we spent a lot of time talking about problems and issues, and we needed to really be applied in what we did. So over the years, we have done environmental management work, and climate resilience, disaster risk management actually is a very significant part. So I was happy to hear Mr. Edmund talk about the need for climate adaptation and climate resilience, because that is what we need in the Caribbean. Mitigation is important, reducing our greenhouse gases and so on. But at the end of the day, we have to build our coping capacity, and that is pretty much a lot of what Environmental Solutions is involved with. So I'm pleased to have this multi-faceted team, multi-sector team, multi-professional team, and I'm going to start on my right.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Leisha Ann Smith. I'm an attorney at law and a partner with Nunez Schofield Dillon & Co. attorneys. And essentially, we do work for many developers. Over the years, we have assisted in implementing a lot of the developments you see within Jamaica. Our firm is a succession of partnerships that has been around for the past approximately 95 years. So we've had a good impact on the development landscape in assisting developers.
Thank you, Alicia. Next to you.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Lenworth Kelly, immediate past president of the Incorporated Master Builders Association, and also past president of the Jamaica Institution of Engineers, with, 30+ years experience in the industry. We provide project management and construction services. In my former years, I also did engineering analysis and design, from geotechnical right through to structural. For today's, I just want to put a plug in early. I'm really grateful to the PSOG and the IDB for this particular. I think they deserve a round of applause for just putting this on. And where's the guy that signed the checks from IDB? Right, so just send others to hope that IDB will remain at the table. Just provide the funds and we'll get it done. But really looking forward to this. There's just so much more, and certainly hoping that the public sector will be present. Camille, we spoke. We need the public sector here. It can't just be on one side. What they do impacts what we do in the private sector significantly. Thank you.
Good morning, everyone. Okay, great. My name is Malini Samdani, IDB Invest. And at IDB Invest, we're looking to see how the private sector, as I was just mentioning, can mobilize that finance towards the sustainable development goals. So we're looking at climate action, we're looking at social inclusion, and we want to work on the knowledge, but also on the investment, and also in technical assistance to help all of you think about how you can contribute to the SDGs. Thanks.
Dayton Wood. I'm the chairman of Jamaica Developers Association. I started off in life as a proud graduate of Jamaica School of Agriculture. Being from Kingston, I was then dubbed an asphalt farmer. And I didn't know that that would stay with me through the rest of my life. I'm still farming asphalts and doing developments. Happy to be here, very, very interested in, as developers, sustainable developments. And we, I think, have a framework because we now have a new building code which incorporates a number of sustainable goals for water harvesting, sewage treatment, and of course, resilience against hurricanes and earthquakes. So I look forward to this discussion. And I'm very grateful to the PSOJ and the IDB for this forum.
Thank you, Dayton. So thank you, Dayton, Melanie, Lenworth, and Licia. Okay, so we heard that we're here for a shared purpose, and I just want to join in thanking the IDB. IDB has been involved with Jamaica for a long time and in infrastructure. So IDB Invest it's really very important. Just to say that a few years ago, the Green Climate Fund provided a readiness grant to the Climate Change Division. And they looked at a regional scoping exercise. What were the MSMEs doing? Where were they? What did they think in terms of implementing climate change measures? And two of the key things that came out of that, the need for finance, the need for, well, three things, the need for finance, the need for increased understanding of how climate change would affect their businesses, and thirdly, building capacity. So here we are this morning looking at some of those issues. So we have shared purpose. It's a critical time. The business sector is important. Government sets the policy framework, sets the legislative framework, and so we are pleased to have our legislator, we're pleased to have our engineers, we're pleased to have our investors, financiers, and our developers. It's important where we build, as we're talking construction, where we build, how we build, what we put in, absolutely critical for sustainability. And we're not going to focus on challenges or problems as much as solutions this morning. So I'm going to begin by asking Melanie. First of all, Melanie, in your opinion, what are the most effective strategies for incorporating climate resilience into new construction projects? And how can financial institutions ensure that they align with the sustainability goals while maintaining market competitiveness? A mouthful, really, but what do we need to do? What should we be thinking about as we align with sustainability? Because our investments need to be sustainable, and regrettably, sometimes we don't understand all that we need to do.
Sure. So, you know, the first thing when we think about climate resilience is we have to know what to do. And you'll see some of that later in the presentation. But so far, a lot of the conversation is around renewables, around energy efficiency. And that's really, really important. That's very important to prevent climate change from getting worse. But what's already happening is that we're already seeing these events. So how do we prepare in the face of climate change? So to answer your question on what can be done, really we need standards, we need knowledge, we need frameworks. And if you start looking at the building standards that exist for the most part today, it focuses on emissions reductions, it focuses on green buildings, but it doesn't capture the resiliency component. And the reason for that is because it's more difficult to do, it's more challenging. What we do here isn't the same as what we can do. It's not just 20% in emissions reductions here and in Trinidad and in Barbados and in other countries. Emissions reductions are the same everywhere. Here, we have to look, okay, in this specific location, what are the specific threats, and then what interventions can we use so that it becomes more resilient. So we're starting to see, resiliency standards, resiliency certifications that provide a stamp of approval. So you, the home buyer, now knows, okay, I feel confident in this construction. The bank that's financing you also knows, okay, this is a green building. It doesn't only target emissions reductions, but it also targets resiliency. So I feel confident in this building. And so to your second question on what can financial institutions do, really they need that stamp of approval, because financial institutions now in-house are starting to develop expertise, but these stamps of approvals, these certifications can help them to say, oh, check mark, that's a green building, because there's a lot of financing available for green assets. What we're facing is creating those projects that can be financed, right? And so financial institutions need that support as well, so that they know what green buildings are. And in terms of what are the incentives for them, it's moving now from CSR to this is a key business risk. This is something that financial institutions need to think about. Just last week in the US, for example, there's now a new regulation. The SEC announced that financial institutions and companies, large companies everywhere, have to disclose their emissions. They have to disclose the financial risk associated from climate change. So this is coming. It's becoming a key business issue.
Thank you, Melanie. That's an important point. And raising the business of corporate social responsibility. What we're talking about are serious business issues. It's no longer a do-good, a feel-good. It is a serious business issue. Environment is good business. And that's what we're talking about here, which is why it is also very encouraging that we have the two panels coming together where we're looking at climate change adaptation and we're looking at environmental social governance, because that is the measure, that is the business direction now, where businesses have to report their environmental practices, how they're minimizing risk, how they're dealing with the people side of things, and how it is all being integrated into their corporate structure. So while we talk people, planet, prosperity, this is real, and this is what IDB is supporting. So I'm now going to turn to Lenworth to ask him, from the point of view of the incorporated master builders and maybe the engineering experience, what significant challenges do construction professionals in Jamaica face when they are attempting to implement climate resilient building practices? One, and then are there specific areas where the industry needs more support, more resources, training, capacity building, what?
Thanks, Eleanor. To answer the first question is just one word: money. Because what it is, as professionals, when you come to the table, you have an awareness of what needs to be done. But you come to a client, a private sector client, money is not infinite. The availability of funds comes with limitations. And so the client will come and say, listen, I need a multi-story commercial, mixed-use commercial residential building, for example, but I can only spend X, and I need this amount of square feet. So largely what you find is a lot of the considerations that you want to implement will go out the window because the immediacy of the impact of not spending it's not there. If the impact was facing you, they would make the spend. So usually there's that constraint. For engineering for buildings, codes change and we use usually the most recently available data. So if we find in the past 3, 4, 5 years, we have increased intensity of rainfall and more often. So back in, say, maybe 30 years ago, we would design for 1 in 50, what we call return rainfall event, which is a certain kind of flood, X amount of inches over a certain period of time. Now, we're getting that perhaps, thank you very much, we're probably seeing that once a year. So the thing has changed. So you would be designing for that without calling it climate smart, because you design based on the most recent data. We don't have the benefit of still designing for 50 years ago. It's different now, but when we have for like these, certainly brings it into focus. So you're already doing it without actually telling your client that, you know, we're designing for climate smart. But there are some elements that need to be in there. There are a bunch of stuff. The focus tends to be on like energy. The reason why is because none of us are comfortable when we're hot. It's just simply, it's just a human thing. So we focus on keeping cooler, making use of the heat, so we put in solar systems to kind of generate energy to cool us. So there's a lot of emphasis being put there. That's incentivized. But what about building systems like what we call ICFs, insulated concrete forms, where are people who just used to concrete and steel? When they talk to a homeowner, it's a concrete house I want. They're not interested in where you go and poke it to feel like it's sinking because the foam is on both sides, but the middle has a concrete core, but them can't see it. Then, you know, we're in an environment where, like, gunshot can come through that, you know. Them don't want that kind of house. No, that's the reality that we're facing, you know. Let us be real. So there are things that you want to implement, but you have to kind of do, there's a little balancing act. You can't just be technical. You understand, agent? You have to influence otherwise. You have to bring, so you have to put on your little PR hat too when you're trying to sell it. As an MSME, when you're trying to sell the service, and it's largely, for MSMEs now, it's largely service-oriented when we're speaking at this particular topic. There will be products that come along later, but we're not up there yet for that to kind of make a significant space for MSMEs. Now, so that is kind of like without taking up too much of Eleanor's time, that is basically the essence of the challenges that we find. It's largely restricted by budget, and sensitizing clients is important. So this forum, very, very important. Thank you.
Thank you, Lenworth. It's interesting that you say the clients, one of the first things to go out the window very often, and I think that's what you were saying, is the environmental consideration. They wouldn't tell you to put in less steel. They wouldn't tell you to put in less concrete, but let's get rid of this environmental thing, which is really a nuisance anyway and a high cost. So the challenge is to really bring it to the table that this is the significant aspect to make your investment last and to make your investment sustainable. As we say, it is not a nuisance, it is an important business factor, but it is information. It is sensitization. What's in it for me? Why must I do it? As you have said, that is really the hook. And we have come a long way. And this forum this morning is great, but we have a long way to go because it is the beginning. And hopefully we will have some input from you. So I'm going to go over now to Dayton. To ask him, from the developer's standpoint, what are the main challenges and opportunities for integrating climate resilience into new construction? Kind of a follow-on from
yes, thank you, Eleanor. Yes, and Lenworth put his finger on it. Money. What does it cost? Because we have, as developers, we are planning to provide our products to a market that has a finite ability to purchase. So, not that we don't want to put climate resilience into every building that we build. We need to put it in. We have to accept that. Now, how can we do that at a cost that the end product is affordable? And there are a number of ways I think that this can be achieved. Intelligent architectural and engineering designs. Because a lot of times, some developers have a finite figure in mind and don't stop to do the necessary planning in terms of having engineers and architects in right away at the concept stage so that they know what the building is going to cost, what it is that they need to make it smaller, they need to make it larger, they need to design the building so that it meets the prevailing wind, so it's cooler. Putting in sumps, water tanks underneath the homes, things like that that are maybe not that expensive, but also effective. Rainwater harvesting, stopping runoff water from going down the street and wrecking the roads, putting in French drains to trap the water. Things like that that can be incorporated in the design of the building at the beginning, and that would be cost effective and still cost more, yes, but down the road your purchaser would be much happier with that. So as developers, we're trying to promote this. We, as a Developers Association, we have had regular webinars recently. We started off with a focus on the New Building Act, because the new building code is actually quite rigorous. And as I said as an opening, it is a lot of the framework is there for climate resilience and sustainability. It needs to be properly advertised. Engineers need to be seized of that, or developers need to be seized of it, and or buying public needs to be aware of what is possible and what they should be demanding. The other factor that I always is a pet peeve of mine is sewage treatment. The government has been spending through the NWC a lot of money running in sewer lines throughout, certainly in the corporate area. The sewer line runs past your home, but there's no consideration as to how to connect you to the sewer line. So you continue, your home continues to put the sewage into the ground and poisoning the underground aquifer. So how can we find a way to connect that? And this would be probably an element for SMEs to come in to provide these retrofitting elements for each homeowner. Now this could be charged, it could be charged against to NWC because they're charging you twice as much for your water supply, whether or not you connect to the system or not. So, there's room there for some type of long-term funding. I hear the IDB Invest is here. Perhaps this is something that they could work on, and it would certainly help the environment. It would reduce the costs around long-term costs in a sustainable way. So in a nutshell, Eleanor, I think that's where, as developers, we're looking. And we can't plan as developers. We know planning can't be done in silos. All people have to be on board from the get-go. Quantity surveyors, engineers, architects, and of course, the financiers.
Thank you, Dayton, for raising that, the holistic approach, the integrated approach. But you raised a very important point, and it is one about bringing everybody to the table at the concept stage. So we need to integrate what we're doing into the project cycle. We tend to have an idea, we do the designs, we do whatever in silos, and then you say, okay, we go and we try and get a permit to do what we want to do. That's the back end, and that's the tailpipe, and that's not going to make us sustainable. We need to integrate the whole issue of due diligence into the project cycle so that when you have an idea, you look at what is it we're going to do, where are we going to do it, what are the assets, what are the liabilities. We bring our architects, we bring our engineers, so that we design for the circumstance to have effective costs and to have a sustainable entity. So I'm now going to turn over to Licia because we're talking now some of our own business practice, best practice, but also legislation and policy. So, Licia, from your perspective, I have two questions which are kind of interrelated, but can you discuss the, well, let's start with this one. What currently exists within the legal frameworks to enhance climate sustainability and better support the development and enforcement of climate resilient building standards?
Thank you, Ellen. Thank you. So our legislative framework is actually very extensive. We've always been building throughout the years, it's obvious. And what we have seen is that in instances, although there may have been certain laws, they were not necessarily followed. Now, in 2019, our Building Act came into effect. And what that sought to do is to make it possible for persons to see in one place what it is that we're required to do if we want to carry out construction. Now, we live on Earth. We have finite land, unless, of course, say, volcanoes are creating new land, and that still takes time. But for our purposes, Jamaica is not getting any larger. So we have a finite space within which to work. When you travel around the country, you see how much undeveloped land there is. And the question is, how can we utilize that, but utilize it in a way in which we do not create adverse effects? That is what the Building Act is seeking to do now by bringing into focus all the various aspects of construction that actually interrelate. In the past, it used to be that the focus was mainly just on safety. So if you're putting up a structure, yes, you must have your block and steel. Later on, we see that, okay, you put up a structure, you're living there. Where are you going to use the bathroom? All right, pit latrine. What effect does that have? So we move to potable water, flush toilets, etc. But that still creates an impact. You may not see it right away, but the impact is there and it builds up over time. If we don't have structures in place to deal with that buildup, it will all crash at one point. So what the Building Act is seeking to do is to ensure that from the very beginning, the construction that is taking place is done in such a way that it contemplates what happens in the future. The Building Act brings into play certain codes. They are collectively called the Building Code of Jamaica, and it incorporates international best practices as well as certain international building codes across the world. There are codes that relate to fire safety, and certainly in our context where we see a lot of high-story, multiple-story buildings going up, you have to have certain processes and systems in place to ensure that if there is a fire, persons are able to leave the building. So you have safety. Aside from that, nowadays we're looking at comfort, convenience. With the change in environment, we've had some hot summers. Last summer, I think they said was the hottest on record, and it is likely to get even hotter. What that means is that we need to have things in place to cool us down. We may not have significant changes in weather, such as snow in January and then boiling sun in June, but we're still noticing those changes. We have the Saharan dust coming and affecting us, affecting our breathing capabilities, etc. All of this has to be tied in so that when constructing, we're doing it in such a way to mitigate against those things. The use of renewable energy is also very important. Unfortunately, it's very costly. So for someone to implement a solar panel system, it sometimes costs a lot of money. The legislation is clear. It creates certain requirements, so those things that you just have to do if you're going to construct. Then there are those elements that are, call it, it would be nice if you did. The current Act wants those renewable energies to be used as a part of what's required. The difficulty right now is the cost to implement it. So, for example, a developer who's going to construct a multi-story building, say 6 floors, they're supposed to have an elevator. Elevators are not cheap, not to put in, not to maintain. And as far as I know, we don't have many companies that make elevators here. So in many instances, it means bringing it from overseas. Import duties, other costs. All of that adds up. When a developer is seeking to implement a development, in many instances, it is a matter of cost, because at the end of the day, they want to be able to sell what they've produced. If there are no buyers, then there's no point in doing it. So the legislative framework has to carefully balance how that can be done while still achieving the sustainability that we need. And the Building Act seeks to do that, but that's where enforcement comes in, because you can have it on paper, but if nobody's following it, it makes no difference.
Thank you. Very important points, and I'm going to just follow up with a second question before we go back, because the legal framework, the policy framework is just so important. Can you discuss, and you have alluded to play between the legal frameworks, the financial considerations, and the approval process in fostering sustainable development in the property sector. We tend to talk about the approval process perhaps even more than the sustainable design. Can you talk about that?
Yes. So the approval process, I know, is something that is near and dear to the heart of many developers. And that's because over the years, it has proven to be a very difficult process. We have what are called development orders, which are supposed to govern what you look at when you want to implement a development. And it's not necessarily a 1,000-unit project, but even you have one piece of land and you want to get 4 parcels. There is a process for that. There seems to be a lot of ignorance, for want of a better word, of what is required. And rather than seeking to find out, what you have is that people just go and do whatever they feel like. Again, largely driven by what is it going to cost me? And unfortunately, that tends to be at the forefront of most people's minds. With the legislation, there are now requirements that have to be followed. If they are not followed, then with proper enforcement, they should not even be able to get off the ground. If a developer seeks to implement a development now, and it has always been, plans have to be submitted to the local authority, and that is what is to be approved. The plan is circulated to various agencies, National Water Commission, the Jamaica Fire Brigade, the National Works Agency, because all aspects are supposed to be looked at. What impact is it going to have on the traffic in the area? What impact is it going to have on the sewage system, the provision or supply of water? There are many developments where persons have moved in and yet they can't get water. You hear that, oh, they need a pump, they need to have a tank, etc. Unfortunately, we have a significant portion of our population that just is not able to afford certain things, and not all at once. And what it means is that certain things then are not put in place. So in terms of the cost constraints, that's the biggest problem. So what we need are ways and means of, one, having persons recognize the importance of having those things in place, and then making the supply a bit easier for them to obtain. So that is where I do think MSMEs can come in. You have to do your market research. What is it that is the greatest difficulty? You see persons who live in an area, and over time, greater development happens, and then problems develop, even in multifamily communities. Yes, just the interaction between neighbors, that can create a lot of difficulties. If some of these things were addressed from the beginning, then they would not have so many problems. So it is about what can be done so that persons understand it's not just what you see now, but 10 years down the line. If I put up a single-story structure, but then I go up another story and my roof is overhanging my neighbor's roof, when it rains, what happens? Yes, even things as simple as that are what need to be contemplated, because at the end of the day, if water is running off, the authorities can be called in and you can be asked to address whatever issues have been caused. So there is a significant interplay between the legal framework, and again, it goes back to how is it going to be enforced. They say it takes cash to care, and it does. If we don't have enough inspectors, certain things will go by the wayside. So just as with private sector, putting money in, the government also has to put the money where the mouth is to make sure that the inspections are being done, and if there are problems, they're identified early enough so that they can be addressed.
Thank you very much. You raised the issue of water, which is a critical issue in terms of climate change, because and it's not just for Jamaica, but globally, because we have less rainfall. The projections are we're going to be getting less rainfall. We're very dependent on that. So the availability of water is an important consideration. And the other one, that issue that's been raised, and we're throwing it out, is a matter of health, sanitation, Dayton. Health and water, two critical issues for us as we talk about how to adapt and how to move forward with the people focus. That's what we need to be about. And how do we ensure that we have adequate water, because we're not manufacturing, and we can't just simply put the buildings and expect the water to follow, which is what is happening, regrettably. We also put the buildings and expect the sewage disposal to follow, and it just doesn't happen. So, Dayton, I'm going to come to you now, because I know that with respect to the approval process, you had indicated in some of our earlier discussions that what led to the formation of the Developers Association. So now, if you can just tell us that, and how do you see the role of the developers? Now, what can the developers do in, or how do you see it evolving in response to increasing climate change impacts on the property market? Climate change is here, it's very much affecting us, and it's not going away. It's going to become even more of a consideration.
Yes, Senator. I think about 55 years ago, the Jamaica Developers Association was formed, and the cause that brought the developers together was the lengthy time it took to get the buildings plans approved. And 55 years later, we're still having that battle. We have gotten to a point where there is a 90-day, presumably a 90-day window. Some of the municipalities tell us that they're having 80 and 90% compliance with that. I don't think that that is necessarily so. Some people get it through in 30 days and some people get it through in 30 months. But that is the nature of what we're dealing with. But there are processes that I think are necessary to bring that approval process into some kind of order. And one of the things that one of my predecessors had, Reynolds Scott, when he was chairman, he had an arrangement done with the NEPA, where there was a Developers Assistance Center formed. And this is a very good system, where if you have a developer identify the property anywhere, you can go to the Developers Assistance Center, pay a nominal fee, and they will tell you what exactly you can build based on the regulations that exist, the development orders that exist. Unfortunately, that is something that's done in the breach. When you have designed your plans, beginning with your formulation, you're formulating your plans, you go to them again, and they review it with you, and they can give you an idea of where you need to make changes. This, again, is not being followed properly because it takes a little bit of time. And we do have some developers in Jamaica who are not members of the association, by the way, who go ahead and build because they can't wait, they don't want to wait, and they just go ahead and do what they want to do. And we're seeing the results. So the development process can be streamlined. A good dose of sunlight can be brought into it. That makes it much more transparent for everybody to see, and then it will move smoother. But to come back to your question about the role that we can play.
And you have alluded to it, yeah.
The role that we as developers can play is to, A, promote this use of the Developers Assistance Center. That's number one. Number two, as I mentioned earlier, holistic planning from the get-go. Because if you plan it properly, all that we need for resilience is within the building can be achieved at reasonable cost. And if we plan what happens to the runoff water, we can put that down into the aquifer. And that will recharge our aquifer. Water is going to be a very, very scarce commodity. And in fact, there are some people predicting water wars in years to come. Hopefully, long time after I'm no longer here. But it is something that is real and can happen. So if we don't look after what little water we have now, we're going to have a problem. And let's face it, Jamaica was known as land of wood and water, right? And so we need to husband that little water we get, and that's what key things for me, and also making sure that our sewage treatments are looked after properly. As I said, the building plans and the building codes right now, if they are followed, look after resilience for hurricane and earthquake. So, and fire and all those safety issues, but they need to be followed.
Thank you, Dayton. So you're talking about working with the regulatory authorities, you're talking about working with your members and maybe reaching out even beyond your membership.
Absolutely, and we need to get this out to the public that they know what they need to expect, what they ought to expect from what the product that they're buying.
Okay, the time is against us, it seems. I don't know, Lenworth, we had some other questions, but we want to, we also want to get to the audience, right? So, Lenworth, we're going to just do a quick quick. I had one other question for you about how you see balancing the costs, the balance between the costs and the long-term benefits of climate-smart construction. You have alluded to it already, so maybe you can just reinforce what you said.
All right, so essentially what it really is for the promoter of the project, it's your capital cost. You're looking at the capital cost and the risk of replacing whatever you're spending the capital on. One of the challenges with climate change is that you look at the data you have available, your design, and you want to look at designing for that, but to be climate smart, you have to design and build in anticipation. That's where it gets tricky, in anticipation. So it's going to change, but how much more we're trying to have some agreements if we try to keep it to 1 degree or 2 or that kind of thing. So that is where the challenge is. And a lot of times when the disaster comes, what we have been getting is, we call it disasters. What we get, we have the hazards. The disasters come based on how you have prepared. So if it's not resilient, then it becomes a significant disaster, because the hazard is the hazard. If you get storm surge, if you get swells, and they're coming in, maybe some nominal swells removing your seawall, what we call nominal, no. But if we are designed climate smart, then we don't wait until that swell come, we would be retrofitting what is already there. So whatever it is, whether it's infrastructure, whether it's your own building, you need to be retrofitting. So we have to be, it's something you're proactively doing. It's not a one-time do and sit down, because climate is changing. And so you need to just kind of constantly revisit. So the talk is between that replacement cost versus the capital you want to spend now. You want to spend 500 million now, and have your project be at risk later with climate change, or you want to spend that extra 150 million to ensure that it is a climate smart building, because what's the replacement cost of your $500 million building? It's not going to be $500 million. You have to remove it first. And that's probably another 150 extra that you could just spend now. So that's it.
Thank you, Lenworth. And so I'm going to come back now to Melanie. And this question, I think, will lead ultimately into your presentation. How can financial institutions, everybody is talking about IDB and so on, but it's not manna from heaven. It's, you know, we have to really work with due diligence and with proper planning and integration holistic. So how can financial institutions like IDB further incentivize the private sector to adopt climate resilient practices? And perhaps here, the financial institution is critical, whether we're talking IDB Invest, or we're talking banks. Financial institutions need to be looking at the sustainability of their investment. And they have a critical role, as do insurance companies, in terms of getting the climate smart, the climate adaptation that we want. So over to you, Melanie.
Yeah, so the critical thing here is knowledge, knowledge, knowledge. We need to know what we can invest in. And forums like today start that conversation. The study I'll present later today start that conversation. And it's our hope then that we can continue to build on this. Because another thing we've realized, and I mentioned it earlier, is it's not enough to have global numbers. It's not enough to have regional numbers. It's not enough to have sub-regional numbers. We need country-specific numbers. We need location-specific data. And that's actually a great opportunity for, we've spoken about all the products in resiliency, but also services. We now need consultants, tech consultants, to look at specific climate risk, use GIS software in each location to understand what the vulnerability is in that location. So knowledge is one thing in forums like this that we'll be working on. The second thing is resiliency standards that I mentioned earlier, and actually in Guatemala, we worked on something called CASA, and that's one of the first resiliency standards. And I heard everyone here talk about the cost, but what is the cost? Will people be willing to pay? And what we found by doing this research is that actually incorporating resiliency only adds 1 to 2% of the cost. So it makes sense to invest that upfront, even though it's more money upfront. But later on, you're going to save so much because now your furniture isn't getting damaged, your home isn't getting damaged, your office isn't getting damaged, and you would have to pay for that anyway in the long run. So financial institutions think about this. Financial institutions also want you to invest in this. They're looking for green assets. But now the question is, how do we develop this from the project developer side? Maybe as one example in what we did in Guyana, so we recently financed a hotel in Guyana that's going to be one of the first in the Caribbean with some of these certifications. It's focused on the EDGE advanced certifications on the mitigation side that I had mentioned earlier, but it's also looking at things like elevating the structure so flooding isn't as much of an issue. So again, knowledge is where it all starts.
Turn to here, you're having your breakfast, but you've heard so much in parts, and so we're going to ask you just to raise your hand, just say who you are, and share your thoughts.
All right, first up.
Good morning. My name is Chad Brand. I'm the Communications and Social Impact Coordinator at Carib Cement. Well, CEMEX Carib Cement. So I wanted to say that as the sole manufacturer of cement on the island, Carib Cement is moving to implement technology, cement that is actually, that bears climate change into consideration. So we introduced what is called Virtua. Now, Virtua is a certification of cement, and my colleague is here with me, so she can correct me. So what it is that our cement now is low carbon. It's not produced with that high intensity. We're using less HFO and more sustainable fuel into the production of cement. So we are already down the wicket. CEMEX on a whole is already down the wicket in terms of its climate smart ambitions, right?
Okay. A round of applause for CEMEX.
Thank you. Thank you. Congratulations.
Next.
Good morning. My name is Rashida Khan, and I'm from Environmental Solutions. I want to first thank Mr. Wood on his answering of the questions. He has posed a lot of questions, but he also provided the solution, especially when it came to the whole aspect of the sewage and the fact that we need to now look at how our runoff can be used to recharge our aquifer, because as we build out, we're now concreting, putting a lot of concrete space. We're removing the green space, so that whole recharging capacity is being impacted. Now, I want to speak to Ms. Smith, I think, right? You're an attorney of law, and you're aware of our building codes. In my field of work, I've worked in a lot of industries where new owners, as they have built their home, they have problems with mold, there's problem with moisture intrusion, there's cracks in their building, structural cracks. A lot of our agricultural lands are also being used for development. And as Ms. Santani has spoken about, where we build is important, because when and with climate change, we find that there are environmental change. Well, some cases when it increases the rate of mold, and which mold is growing in a surface and so on and so forth. As a person who represents developers, right, and you have mentioned that enforcement is not something where it should be. How do you now help developers to consider these things, these risks, especially to the homeowners who are buying into this space, not knowing these problems? How do you help to guide them to look at these impacts and to put structures or put things in place to help them mitigate them?
Thank you. One of the things is that, unfortunately, in many instances, the attorney is brought in after plans have been done, approvals have been obtained, etc. So from a certain standpoint, we are able to advise our clients as to what the legal requirements are. However, beyond that, there is so much and no more we can do. What we do suggest, however, is that certainly whatever approvals have been obtained must be adhered to. In the whole approval process, issues such as the safety of the structure that's going to be erected, as well as the environmental factors, are taken into consideration. NEPA is an integral part of the whole approval process, and certainly depending on the size of the development, environmental impact studies have to be carried out and other types of studies so that they can mitigate the negative impact on the environment. The Building Act itself stipulates that one of the things is that there must be open spaces. So even with these huge developments, you have to have certain areas reserved for certain type of activities. You shouldn't be just removing all of the trees, because that in itself will have an impact. Those are the things that the developers now have to ensure that they're adhering to. With enforcement, that will hopefully take place. But with education, hopefully they will understand from the beginning that even in coming up with the plans for the developments, they should take these things into consideration. There are many developers who, once you construct the houses, there will be complaints. The issue of mold is live, but it is something that requires a lot of education. Persons don't realize that there's mold in the air, just generally. When it becomes a problem is when it has increased to such a level that it is no longer at balance. That can be impacted by a number of factors. So just having your house locked up can result in mold developing. It may not be that there was something done incorrectly with the construction of the house, but because of increased humidity, moisture, mold can develop. So education is needed so that persons understand what the possible effects are and how to mitigate against them. And certainly the developers play a part in that too.
All right, we do have another question.
Thank you. Good morning. David Barrett, NBAR Consulting and member of the PSOJ. So the question is, what interventions have been made or will be made in terms of ensuring that Climate Smart is incorporated at the building stage? So I know we have a building code, but how much of it has things like energy efficient air conditioning? We have a CARICOM building code. How much of it ensures that for all of these residential buildings and commercial buildings, there must be rainwater harvesting, or there should be use of the roof space for renewables? So particularly maybe the JDA or the MAJ, what is your role in ensuring that the regulations encourage those who don't have other incentives, and also what incentives can be put in place to ensure that it means good business for the private sector? Thanks.
Who is going to take that one? Wentworth? Turn on your mic. Check, check, check. Go again.
Hearing me now? All right, so to come straight to you, that's largely a regulatory issue. However, as private sector, not just the IMAJ, but also the engineers, architects together, we do advocate for these things. Now, part of what's troubling is that most of us sit on the committees that develop the regulations, but the regulations haven't yet come into force. So, but at the regulatory, because the regulations is what's going to kind of give you a bit more of a point. Yes, there's a code, and the building code is really adopting the international building code and what we call local application documents. So we have local documents for energy, for residential, for fire, and so on. So each one of us here has a role to play in terms of informing the regulations. We have to write to them as Ministry of Local Government. We have to make that voice be heard so the consideration is given. Now, in terms of how it's done, we have to ensure that there's that concert with those who regulate, which is largely for buildings we're talking about here, would be a local planning authority or a parish council, or municipal corporations, they call them now. And what has to happen is that the personnel they have within these organizations must be equipped. We have a building officer, but that building officer been there for years, has never been to a forum like this. Doesn't keep up to date, they don't train them. I mean, you see it from a lot of us who are professionals. If you're on a location and they turn up, you realize, whoa, they really come up short. And it's really, we are this far along largely because we have professionals in the private space who insist that it's done, and not so much because of the regulators a lot of time. NEPA does a great job. They do the best they can, but their limitations are associated with resources. So the truth is that these things need to be worked into conditions of approval. If your conditions of approval say, yes, rainwater harvesting, this must be in, then you need to show in your design what volume you're putting in. You need to show in your design where your runoff goes so that everything can percolate and go back to recharge your aquifer, as Mrs. Khan said. So that's where your incentive is. You fit it inside of the conditions of approval. We have advanced from the IMAG, we have advanced arguments to the Ministry of Local Government and some municipal corporations. What we have said is, make it a condition of approval that the developer, the promoter of the project, maintains the professional technical persons on the job during construction. What a lot of developers, and it's largely those who are not members of the Developers Association, they hire the architect and the engineer to do the design, and then they're done with them. So they don't know what is built. They don't know what is built. And what we have suggested to the municipal corporations is put it in the conditions to ensure that those professionals have to submit what you call milestone reports. So the architect and the engineer will supply a report that the foundations are built, the concrete is of the desired strength, the steelwork, all of that, and submit your drawings and your testing information so that it's there. Then when they do the first floor, you submit another report, because a lot of times the regulator just barely walk past the building and take a peep and gone, right? Their visits aren't enough to establish anything, and we need some record to show that what is approved is built.
All right, we have a...
So if we have...
just three more.
Three more,
yes.
And then we'll come back to the other.
Okay.
I'll be very... Sure. Jerry Johnson, working for a private equity firm that has an IDB Invest money in it. Comments have been made about insurance. Comments have been made about building codes. What we've noticed in the Caribbean is that there's a group of SMEs that, in order to protect their infrastructure, they need to borrow. And the banks, as you know, to lend, they will not lend unless there's insurance. What happened last year with the reinsurance costs going through the roof means that many SMEs, maybe larger companies, can afford to make the investments that we're hearing about in my leading, that you spoke about. And it's really, really important, those kind of returns. It's very important that information be shared and they be encouraged to make those investments because it makes economic sense. But very quickly, there's a subset of SMEs that don't have that option. They need to borrow. To borrow, you need insurance. And there's something happening in the region where companies are losing access to insurance. It's just too expensive. Insurance companies are suffering with something called self-insurance. Companies just can't afford to pay the high insurance rates, and so they seek to protect themselves with using internal funds. But for that group that can't do it, there's something that happened in Florida, as everybody knows, where the government worked with the insurers to put in place building codes and that ensured that the insurance companies that encouraged the insurance companies to keep providing insurance at affordable rates, it created a boom in retrofitting, in new construction, according to the new codes. And the question is it possible to encourage a similar type of dynamic in the Caribbean, where the building codes are updated in partnership with the insurers so that we can reverse this very negative trend of less and less insurance for SMEs, which is also lack of access to finance, lack of growth, and what we all care about, which is growing resilience to climate change, also being slowed down. Thank you.
Who's going to take that one? Do you want to add to that before the response? Okay.
Good morning. Thanks. My name is Leo Williams. I'm with Seif Caribbean Private Equity, the same company as Jerry. When Eleanor started, she said we're going to be speaking about solutions. We're not going to be speaking about what the problems are. And I heard both Alicia Smith and Malini speak about the legislation and the need for data. And so I think even Lenworth spoke about it and Dayton, that construction takes place and there is a legislative background and enforcement that can happen that has not been happening. But even downtown, when Digicel put up its building, it was promoting that it was the most climate-friendly building in the entire Caribbean, right? And that was their definition. It wasn't a legislative definition or a standard that was defined or even rated by some independent certifiable entity. And so while you do have enforcement that can take place and should and will, is there also a way with the regulations that are coming into place to infuse into that an incentive for a rating system of the climate friendliness, even if it's just scoring by low, medium, high, 1, 5, 10, and that scoring can then drive the incentives of giving insurance premiums, discounts that can then foster better climate-friendly development. If it's only 1 or 2%, as Malini said, and you can save on insurance claims, 5 years down the road, that's a beautiful business proposition. What's needed is just an incentive system for rating the climate friendliness of the construction.
Very good point, Leo. Thank you. Can we just hear from?
Sure, happy to take that. And so, no, listen, this is an amazing idea to pair resiliency with reduction of insurance premiums. I think with all solutions, they take time, and this is actually something we've been thinking about for years now. One model like this that has been successful has been a water utilities insurance company for the Caribbean. But what we found as we were studying it was that it wasn't yet bankable for the private sector. And so ultimately, it had to be a government intervention. But I think this is something that we have to continue working on. A lot of the work we're doing now that seems easy to do, solar is fairly easy now. It's, it makes sense. It's taken decades to get here. And I know we don't have time in the face of climate change, but this is something that we have to keep working on, this idea of, well, if we increase resiliency, if we work with insurance companies, if we get everything right in the building code, then in theory, we should be able to reduce those insurance premiums and make it more affordable for companies and for individual households.
The question of insurance is something I've been mulling over as well. Now, the regulations are there as to what you need to put into the building to make it safe and resilient. Now, where, as we've heard before, we're falling down is it actually happening? Is it going into the building? And one of the suggestions that has been made is that we have a Jamaica Institute of Engineers, we have a Jamaica Institute of Architects, we have a Jamaica Institute of Quantity Surveyors, that these folks could be as your bonding with professional bonding insurance, that they would have to certify that what was designed on paper is what is in the ground. Photographs taken, dated photographs. So you get on every building that goes up, there is a file for every stage of the development so that we know what went into it. And that forms the basis for your insurance coverage. It forms the basis for your mortgage. Financiers providing mortgages for these buildings. I know some mortgage companies have their own engineers going out now and checking, and surveyors going out and checking the information they're getting from some developers to make sure that it's accurate. So if we had some form of bonding, performance, professional indemnity insurance or bonds or whatever in place, this would be one way in which the public, buying public, could be assured and that A, the building is built properly, and secondly, the financiers would be assured that it is a sound investment, and insurance companies could see that this risk is much less and reduce the cost. Now, it's going to, for insurance companies, they look at the whole cross-country risk. So the good will suffer for the bad, but over time that will come down. And I guess this is where SMEs come in with the retrofitting and putting in of all the different things that needs to take place. But we have to start somewhere.
Okay, thank you, Dayton. I think
the final question, because we're going to wrap and go into the study.
Yeah.
So introduce yourself for us all.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Petra Brown from Environmental Solutions Limited, and I just have a question as it pertains to sea level rise. Considering the fact that 90% of our critically economic infrastructure is located within the coastal zone, what considerations are now being made by developers to address climate projections of sea level rise, saline intrusion, and coastal erosion in the area? Thank you.
I think everybody needs to learn to swim. But again, planning needs to take place, no? So we have seen some studies that suggest that in 30, 40 years' time, the Kingston Harbor will be up to Port Royal Street if we don't do something about seawall. So, you know, now is the time to start planning for that. And there are areas that, unfortunately, there's no amount of mitigation that's going to help you. So those studies and what the projections are need to be made available to our regulatory partners, particularly NEPA, and so that when developers come along and see a nice parcel of land that they would like to develop, to tell them, no, sorry, this is going to be underwater in 10 years. I mean, we see it at Helsha, we're seeing it at Little Ochi in St. Elizabeth, Manchester there, and other areas. So it's a very real thing, and with those projections need to be, everybody needs to be aware of it. It needs to be public knowledge. All of these government regulations and building codes, they need to be public knowledge. People need to be aware. NHT needs to put it in their documents, what you need to look for when you're buying a home, and get it out there.
All right, we will oblige just one I'm over here, Eleanor. One last question as we invite the PSOJ team to make a presentation to the panelists and moderator for panel number 1. What's your question, sir?
Okay, so we have been talking about building codes and, you know, the perfect environment since morning. What I want to know is that, you know, from what I see, there's a lack of political will to change what is called, you know, ghetto capture land kind of stuff. And since we're in the business of finding solutions, what is the solution to that where sustainability is concerned? And I'd want a solution from the panel.
Wow.
How to regularize squatting in inappropriate locations is that the question?
It's not regulated. He's saying it's not regulated, so.
Wait, you want
The answer to that would be prayer first, and perhaps some fasting, but since we've had breakfast already. So what this is what we have done is created a disaster. There's no hazard there, but we have set about to create a disaster. Now, you know, the classic case of, so let's look at how you mitigate that. And government owns the biggest land bank. And what we have long argued is, listen, people is just a basic human need for security. You're going to find shelter somewhere. And so we have to be proactive about this. So what we have to do is, in spite of the political abrasion that takes place, what we have to do is look at parcels of land, just go in for now, subdivide them into small lots, give them a 3,000 square foot, just define where the road will go. You can clear that out and allow, and do a parceling. So you allow people to, what you want to say now, occupy. But they occupy in a way that will be sustainable. So later on, you can go in and put in the road. You'd have already defined everything, you know. You just can't do it for them now. But in any event, they must go and go squat anyway. Right? So define it that way. Later on, you can, you know, scrape the road out, put on a decent little base. You can run the lines in. You can tie everybody into sewer. But we have to, that has to be done in advance. And it's the same thing you do for your buildings, you know. Your preparation for a hazard has to do with how you have designed and constructed. Because that building is sitting there, whatever seawall and protective features are built already, you don't get to prepare it any further. So that is my solution for the problem you have put forward. And just to add a last thing, there's a way in which squatting just can't be sustainable in any way. I remember just a case in point out by 7 Mile some years ago. There was a landslide, and I think it killed a parent and a child. And I've been watching this over the years when I drive past. Every time it rains, the dirt come down. And I said, dirt come down and no dirt going back up. What sits on dirt is buildings. And I said, sometime, and I've been saying this like from back in the 90s. And I said, at some point, houses going to come down. So we are in a situation where it's just a disaster zone now. Right? So we have to proactively, government has to do that. Them have the land. Cut it up and just have it ready. So when squatters go and come, if them go and come, so say squat this up and this up. You understand? Say squat this. So later on when we come, you understand? Later on we can put the necessary protective measures in. But don't make them squat haphazardly.
Sorry, and if I may just add, the Building Act actually has a number of objects set out, and one of those is to prevent squatting generally, yes? So while we recognize that there are persons who just cannot afford to go buy a piece of land and so on, it seems as though the legislators have recognized that, and what they want to be able to do is to have a system where if people do have to squat, it can be in areas that are safe and that can be made safe. So the legislation is now in place. We, as a people, everybody, not just government, but private citizens, we have to play our part in that too. So, with greater knowledge, you don't go just build on the gully side. Yes? Because we see that that leads to disaster. So for your own self-protection, you look for something else. So we all have that role to play in that regard.
All right.
Just to add one thing to that, the government is working on that. There have been over a number of decades now, squatter relocation exercises going on, and subdivisions taking place and putting people, giving them title for land. So that is an ongoing program, but it takes time, it's expensive, and putting in infrastructure, etc., is quite expensive.
Okay, so thank you very much, my panelists.